Welcome back to the Josh Kane Presidential Fireside Chat. We're down to our last 4 episodes. I couldn't be happier about that. For the first time in the history of the show, before recording, I was like, oh man, it's time to make the donuts. So it's coming to an end. I've already told the Velvet Hammer that if I even mention season 3, she has the permission to have me locked up. Even though season 3 would have been terrific, I'm gonna do a deep dive on the pre-Civil War. I'm basically calling it the pre-Civil War potpourri. Gonna hit some of the non-president founding fathers and all the maniacs that led us into the Civil War, the Alamo. We're gonna tell this real story of the Alamo, but it'll be for my own private consumption. This show has been enough for everyone, I think. But today, on episode number 219, the star of the Gilded Age, the Big Apple, New York City. If you haven't been paying that close attention, New York has basically played a role in just about every one of these episodes. And you think back to the beginning, the robber barons, obviously they all ended up in New York. Rockefeller came from Cleveland, Carnegie came from Pittsburgh. You had Frederick Law Olmsted built Central Park, he came to New York. You know, you have a guy like General Custer. He was obsessed with living in New York. And then obviously we got the Hearst and Pulitzer. New York has played a central role in this show. And today, in fact, it's going to be multiple episodes. So New York's not only just getting today, but the next episode's also going to be based on New York. And that one's going to, if I can pull off what's in my head for the next episode, it's going to be a blockbuster episode of the Josh Kane Presidential Fireside Chat. Let's hope I can live up to the hype that has already been created in my head. But today, we're going to review 3 iconic buildings that were built in the Gilded Age. A lot of what makes New York City one of the great cities in all of human history, a lot of it was actually built during the Gilded Age. So, you know, the theaters and infrastructure and some of the just stuff that museums, a lot of that stuff was built during the Gilded Age. So today, I want to focus in on 3 of the most iconic structures ever built. Starting first with the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, you think about, you know, the population of the United States. We talked about it last time in the Chicago episode. So in New York, the population of New York City in 1860 was about 813,000 people. Now, that was only the island of Manhattan. At number, the 3rd biggest city in the country was Brooklyn at like 233,000. So at the time, they were not consolidated into one city. It was by the end of the century in 1900, the 5 boroughs became one city. And at that point, the population was like 3.4 million people. But again, at the time, New York, Manhattan and Brooklyn were 2 separate cities, separated by the East River. And the only way to get between the two was through a ferry service until the Brooklyn Bridge was built. Now the bridge started construction in 1870, and it wasn't completed until 1883. So it took 13 years to build. And the story of the building of the Brooklyn Bridge is so fascinating. Again, each one of these 3 iconic buildings could be an episode in and of itself. So again, I'm just going to try and give you the highlights, stuff that I found the most interesting. I've got terrific books at the end. But the Brooklyn Bridge, it's unbelievable what happened. It was built by a German immigrant, or designed by a German immigrant, John Roebling, who actually built a similar looking bridge in Cincinnati across the Ohio River, connecting Cincinnati and Covington, Kentucky. So if you've ever been there, there's a bridge that looks very similar to the Brooklyn Bridge. That was completed in 1866. So he gets the nod to build the bridge here in New York City. But unfortunately, as he's planning it in 1869, he gets his foot crushed by an oncoming ferry and has his foot amputated. But he doesn't do any like follow-up medicine. He believes in this like water therapy where you just constantly keep the wound wet. And he dies like within 25 days of the accident. And it's a pretty painful, really gruesome death. So his son, Washington Roebling, takes over. And again, the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, you know, all the underwater stuff, they didn't really understand what they were doing. A lot of the workers were getting sick from being underwater with the bends. I'm not that familiar with how all that stuff works. I'm not much of a scientist or medical doctor, but a lot of the workers were getting sick, and they couldn't figure out exactly what was happening. But Washington Roebling, I mean, even though he was the leader of the project, he himself got really sick and basically totally disabled from working on the bridge, to the point where he couldn't even get out of bed. So then his wife takes over finishing the bridge. So it was a huge family undertaking, the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. And at the time, the towers were like 278 feet tall, which were the tallest structures in New York. So you think about it, if you go to New York today, the Brooklyn Bridge is, it's a cool, iconic symbol, but you see all the surrounding buildings, it like looks like a tiny little structure now. But back then, it was the tallest structure in Lower Manhattan. So once, the wife takes over, finishes the bridge, and the traffic on this thing, at the time it had trains and passenger, horse and buggy passengers. So it immediately connects the two biggest cities in the country, or two of the three biggest cities in the country. Philadelphia was in the middle. So the completing of the Brooklyn Bridge changed transportation for that area basically forever. Now there's like 4 more bridges that connect Long Island and Manhattan. So that's the Brooklyn Bridge. The book I have at the end is so terrific. I mean, again, goes into way deeper detail, all the construction, the corruption. It has it all. The building of the bridge has everything you could want. Again, it could be a movie, a show unto of itself. The next most iconic structure, maybe in all of human history, the building of the Statue of Liberty. I don't know how much you know about this. Again, I'm only going to be able to touch on the stuff that I found the most interesting. To, again, encourage you to read the book. Maybe you go visit the Statue of Liberty. It was designed, it wasn't even designed for America. America was a distant second. Bartholdi, the guy that designed the statue, actually originally designed it to be at the Suez Canal. But the Sultan, that's just a great, I wish I was a Sultan. He was not interested, just never followed up. So Bartholdi, they basically made up this whole big gift to America. He didn't care about Americans. In fact, he came to visit America. He wasn't necessarily a big fan. And the idea that any of the stuff ever gets built, whether it's the Brooklyn Bridge or the Statue of Liberty, it's kind of amazing. The story in and of itself, who pays for it, who approves the design, everybody hates everything. Again, it's amazing anything ever gets done. Same with the Statue of Liberty. France agrees to raise the funding to build the actual statue, but America has to come up with the money and build the foundation. And France is able to easily raise the money and build the statue. And this statue could have ended up anywhere. It almost ends up in Philadelphia. It almost ends up in Boston. Can you imagine if, one of the Boston Harbor Islands had the Statue of Liberty? Finally, New Yorkers agree, but still having a hard time to raise the money to build the pedestal which it was going to rest on. And finally, Joseph Pulitzer steps in. Again, he owned the biggest newspaper in the country, or I think it was the World. The name of the paper was the World, but I think it was the biggest newspaper in the world as well. And he actually gets small donors, like 120,000 people gave less than $1 to help build the statue. Mostly immigrants. Again, you think about all the rich people in New York, no one was willing to put their own money into building the Statue of Liberty. And a guy that you may have heard of, Eiffel, he's the one that builds the skeleton that actually holds the statue up. This is a couple years before he actually builds the Eiffel Tower, which prompted Mr. Ferris to build a Ferris wheel for the Chicago World's Fair. This whole show is connected. But anyway, so Statue of Liberty gets built, and finally it's dedicated in 1886. President Grover Cleveland was at the dedication. So again, it's really unrealistic that the Statue of Liberty even exists, and now it's like one of the most iconic things ever built by man. the things that represents liberty and freedom and what have you. So, but it barely gets erected. I mean, it's ridiculous. And finally, the last structure we're going to talk about that was built during the Gilded Age. Again, the Gilded Age in New York, there was all kinds of things being done and built, but I just wanted to focus in on 3. Grant's tomb. It's the biggest mausoleum in North America. It's gigantic. Again, unbelievable that it was ever even built in the first place. Grant dies in 1885, and the tomb wasn't built and dedicated until like 1897. So, it took forever to build, to get anybody to agree on anything. The funding, when Grant died, he was the most famous person maybe on the entire planet. 1.5 million people attended his funeral. The parade for his funeral went on and on. You know what's crazy? A lot of these early presidents, Grant and Lincoln in particular, they fought over where to bury these guys like that, and that was like a big deal. They wanted to bury Grant in Washington, D.C., where he was from in St. Louis or Illinois. Everybody wanted his body. The family agrees to have him buried in New York City, and it's in a gorgeous location overlooking the Hudson River. I guess it's not easy to get to, but at the time when it was open, even the dedication ceremony for the tomb, 1 million people attended. I mean, Grant was a huge star at that time. Again, I'm no longer even accepting. I like Grant more than Lincoln, and I'm no longer even accepting our counter arguments to that. I'm just a huge fan of Grant. In fact, if you remember, Grant's on the 50 and Lincoln's on the 5, so the people that came before us thought he was 10 times more valuable. I'm just a fan. I just think Grant has been treated poorly by history. The idea that Robert E. Lee, that creep and traitor, I saw somewhere that he's got the 6th most popular, with names on buildings and statues across the whole country. The guy was a traitor. Every one of those buildings should be replaced with Grant. Every statue should be torn down. That guy is a creep. Grant is terrific. The tomb is awesome. Again, when you go to visit the tomb, it's humongous. It's really nice. And unfortunately, when it was first built, over 500,000 people a year visited the tomb initially. And through World War I, it was actually a lot more popular than the Statue of Liberty. So Grant's tomb is awesome, but then it fell into disrepair. People weren't taking care of it. Into the 1970s, it was covered in graffiti, trash, drug paraphernalia. People were peeing on it, and the urine was destroying the stone. I mean, it's a real sad story, but then it was restored, and now you go up there now, it is so beautiful. You have to make a side trip to visit Grant's tomb in New York City. It's one of my all-time favorite places to go. It's just too bad that it was treated so poorly for so long. All right, book recommendations. This is a fabulous book. Again, David McCullough coming through. He's written a lot of the books I've recommended over the course of the 2 seasons of the show. I mean, this goes into really a lot of detail of the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. It is excellent. I can't recommend this book enough. You really should read it if you're interested. It's a big book, and it's got a lot of detail, but the Brooklyn Bridge is awesome. Next up, Liberty's Torch. Again, all the drama that went into building the Statue of Liberty, which wasn't even designed for America, hardly ended up in New York City. It's really, again, amazing that anything ever gets done. And then finally, Grant's Tomb. This book is not a long book. I think it's less than 200 pages, but it's excellent. Again, it's amazing anything ever gets built. The fact that no one took care of it for such a long time and it fell into disrepair was really depressing. Please do me a favor. Most importantly, do me a favor and do yourself a favor too. next time when you're planning a trip to New York, read this book and go visit Grant's tomb. It's terrific. You'll really appreciate being up. It's pretty far up. It's like 122nd Street, so it's out of your way. You're definitely going to make a trip to go visit Grant's tomb. And for travel recommendation, my recommendation is to visit New York City and visit the three things we talked about today. Go visit Grant's tomb. Walk over the Brooklyn Bridge. Again, when that opened, it was a tourist attraction even at the time when it opened, and it still, you can walk over. That they have an elevated, and that was built at the time, so it's always been a tourist destination. And go visit the Statue of Liberty. Book in advance and get inside the statue if they have it. Go up to the head of the statue. It's terrific. You will not be disappointed. And so New York's going to be split into 2 episodes. So the next episode, we're going to focus in on the guy that's behind the scenes. His nickname given to him by Theodore Roosevelt was the father of Greater New York. He's a Worcester native, Mr. Andrew Haswell Green. We're going to get into the nitty gritty of Andrew Haswell Green on the next episode. It's going to be explosive. That I can promise you. It's going to be no holds barred. And if I can pull off the way I want it to, it's going to be terrific. Well, if it's not, this show is free to you. So don't complain. All right, well, that's New York City, the Big Apple. Bye for now.